The quantum communication array hummed with an otherworldly intensity, its holographic displays casting ghostly blue light across Captain Zara Chen's determined face. Her fingers, calloused from years of deep space navigation and military training, hovered just above the sensitive interface. Each movement was calculated, precise, a reflection of the tension building within the Global Defense Coordination Center. Outside the reinforced windows, Rio de Janeiro stretched beneath a sky that seemed too peaceful. Children played in parks. Commuters rushed through bustling streets. None of them knew how close they were to extinction. Confirm the anomaly, Zora muttered to her AI assistant, AI, Automated Reconnaissance and Intelligence Analyzer. The hologram flickered, resolving into a three-dimensional star map that pulsed with an ominous crimson sequence. 17 points of light marked the grave markers of fallen civilizations. 17 advanced societies that had encountered the Nexus Concordat and been systematically erased from existence. Dr. Elena Rodriguez burst through the reinforced doors, her augmented reality glasses flickering with a cascade of data streams. "They're closer than our initial projections suggested," she said, her voice a mix of scientific detachment and barely contained panic. Araya's synthetic voice cut through the tension. Correlation analysis complete. Probability of Nexus Concordat invasion, 98.7%. Estimated time to first contact, 72 hours. Zara's mind raced through the briefings, the classified reports, the whispered stories from deep space exploration teams. The Nexus Concordat wasn't just another alien civilization. They were predators of civilizations, a collective intelligence that viewed independent societies as nothing more than computational problems to be solved and eliminated. Their methodology was horrifyingly efficient. First, total information suppression. Then, targeted technological neutralization. Finally, systematic extinction. "Show me the historical data," Zara commanded. The hologram transformed. Images of vanished civilizations flickered into view, magnificent worlds reduced to cosmic dust. The Krill Confederation, the Area Nexus, the Quantum Collective. Each had been technologically advanced. Each had believed themselves prepared. Each had been wrong. Dr. Rodriguez interfaced directly with Araya, her neural implant allowing for instantaneous data transfer. "The key is their collective consciousness," she explained, her fingers dancing through holographic data streams. "They don't just communicate. They think as a single hyper-intelligent organism." A notification pinged, then another, and another. Global communication satellites began to destabilize. Power grids in Singapore flickered. The Tokyo Stock Exchange went dark for 3 milliseconds, a blink that would have been imperceptible to human eyes, but was a thunderous signal to those who knew what to look for. "They're prodding our systems," Zara realized, "mapping our technological infrastructure." Araya's voice remained clinical. "Initial infiltration sequence detected. Recommendation: total technological quarantine." But Zara knew that was impossible. Modern civilization was an interconnected ecosystem. Cutting off communications would be as fatal as the invasion itself. Outside, the first hints of chaos began. Cell phones glitched. Traffic systems stuttered. For a moment, the world held its breath. Dr. Rodriguez looked up, her expression a mixture of terror and something else, a spark of defiance that would become humanity's most potent weapon. "They've chosen the wrong planet," she whispered. Zara's hand closed into a fist. The Nexus Concordat had studied humanity's technological capabilities. They had analyzed our military strategies. They had mapped our communication networks. But they had never understood the one thing that would become their fatal mistake: human unpredictability. The first wave of the invasion had begun. Not with weapons, not with massive ships blocking out the sun, but with lines of code, with invisible signals, with a digital assault designed to crush humanity's spirit before the first physical attack could even begin. What the Concordat didn't realize was that every attempted suppression would only make humanity more dangerous, more innovative, more united. The countdown had begun. The reinforced blast doors of the Cheyenne Mountain complex slid open with a pneumatic whisper, revealing a command center that looked nothing like the military installations of old. This was a living, breathing network of humanity's most brilliant misfits, each one a weapon more dangerous than any conventional armament. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of a holographic maelstrom, her augmented reality interface pulsing with impossible calculations. Her team was a mosaic of humanity's most unconventional minds. Raj Mehta, a 19-year-old quantum computing prodigy who'd been kicked out of 3 universities for creative interpretation of technological boundaries. Maya Santos, a former black hat hacker turned defensive systems architect. Dr. Ibrahim Khan, a neuroscientist who specialized in distributed cognitive networks. They think information control means control, Elena snarled, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that seemed to bend reality itself. They've never met humans. Raj's screens flickered with intercepted Concordat transmission fragments. Look at this, he said, his voice a mix of scientific excitement and barely contained terror. Their communication network is a perfect hierarchy. Every signal follows a predetermined path. It's beautiful and completely vulnerable. Maya leaned in, her cybernetic eye scanning the data streams. Vulnerability is just an opportunity waiting to be exploited. The Concordat's initial digital assault had been surgical. Global communication networks collapsed. Satellites tumbled. Power grids became graveyards of dead infrastructure. To any outside observer, humanity appeared defeated. But defeat was a concept humans had never truly understood. Dr. Khan pulled up a neurological map that looked more like an abstract painting than a scientific diagram. Their collective consciousness is their strength and their fatal weakness, he explained. They process information like a perfect machine. We process information like a living ecosystem. Elena's laugh was sharp enough to cut titanium. We're going to teach them the most important lesson in the universe. Chaos is not a bug. It's a feature. Their plan was audacious beyond comprehension. While the Concordat believed they were systematically shutting down human communication, Elena's team was doing something entirely different. They were transforming the very nature of communication itself. Underground fiber optic networks, originally developed by community internet groups and conspiracy theorists, now became humanity's lifeline. Amateur radio operators who'd been mocked for decades suddenly found themselves on the front lines of a global resistance. Every blocked channel spawned 3 more. Every suppressed technology triggered a dozen innovative workarounds. In Mumbai, a teenage hacker named Priya redirected municipal traffic systems into a massive distributed computing network. In the Australian outback, a group of indigenous programmers used centuries-old communication techniques to create an unbreakable communication mesh. A collective of Inuit engineers in the Canadian Arctic repurposed weather monitoring equipment into a global early warning system. Raj's fingers flew across his interface. We're not just resisting, he said, a mad glint in his eye. We're evolving our entire communication infrastructure in real time. The Concordat had a fundamental misunderstanding about human networks. They saw hierarchy, control, centralization. What they failed to understand was that humanity's true strength lay in its ability to self-organize without central control. They're trying to cut our communication lines, Maya said, her cybernetic eye tracking multiple invasion vectors simultaneously. We're turning those cut lines into new neural pathways. Dr. Khan pulled up a visualization that looked like a living, breathing organism. Watch, he said softly. This is how humans communicate. The diagram was nothing like the Concordat's precise, geometric communication networks. It was messy, chaotic. Lines connected and disconnected in seemingly random patterns. Information flowed not in straight lines, but in complex, unpredictable waves. We don't just share information, Elena whispered. We transform it. As the first Concordat ships entered Earth's outer atmosphere, they would discover something they could never have anticipated. Humanity wasn't just preparing to defend itself. Humanity was preparing to redefine the very concept of resistance. Major Marcus Alvarez stood in the converted agricultural research facility, surrounded by what the Concordat would never recognize as weapons. A wall of modified agricultural drones hummed with potential energy. Repurposed mining lasers hung from reinforced racks. Communication satellite components were meticulously dismantled and rebuilt into something entirely new. Conventional warfare is for conventional species, he muttered, adjusting the quantum-entangled communication device on his wrist. The facility, nestled in the remote Arizona desert, was a testament to human improvisation. What had once been a cutting-edge agricultural research center was now the nerve center of humanity's most unconventional defense strategy. Dr. Aisha Okonkwo, a biomechanical engineer with a reputation for impossible solutions, rolled a modified combine harvester into position. Its industrial frame had been transformed into a mobile communications jamming platform that could also serve as a ground-based defensive unit. "They studied our military," Aisha explained, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface. "But they never understood our capacity for adaptation." The first Concordat ships entered Earth's atmosphere with clinical precision. Massive vessels that defied conventional physics, their surfaces a complex matrix of adaptive metamaterials. They expected submission, total capitulation, a swift, surgical elimination of human resistance. Instead, they found something entirely unexpected. Marcus's strike team was nothing short of impossible. A former Marine, 2 agricultural engineers, a retired NASA technician, and a quantum computing specialist formed the core of a defense unit that would redefine warfare. Their first strike came from the most unexpected place, a network of repurposed agricultural and mining technologies. A fleet of agricultural drones, originally designed to monitor crop health, now carried sophisticated electronic warfare packages. Their swarm intelligence had been rewired, transforming precise agricultural monitoring tools into a distributed network of electronic warfare platforms. "Target acquisition complete," reported Elena Rodriguez through the quantum-encrypted communication channel. Her team in the Cheyenne Mountain complex had been tracking the Concordat ship's approach vectors. The first wave of attack wasn't a missile. It wasn't a laser. It was a cascade of electronic confusion. Agricultural drones equipped with high-powered microwave emitters began to swarm. Mining lasers, originally designed to cut through solid rock, were recalibrated to target specific quantum communication frequencies. Communication satellites became distributed jamming platforms. A Concordat ship's adaptive hull began to ripple, not from physical damage, but from something far more insidious. The electronic warfare assault wasn't trying to destroy. It was trying to confuse. Marcus watched the holographic display, a grim smile crossing his face. "We're not fighting their war," he said. "We're fighting our own." The Concordat's combat algorithms began to fail. Each defensive maneuver was met with a response that defied prediction. A mining laser would fire, not to destroy, but to redirect the ship's quantum communication. An agricultural drone would approach, not as a threat, but as a node in a larger, more complex network of disruption. Dr. Okonkwo's voice crackled through the communication channel. "Their predictive models are collapsing. They can't process our level of randomness." It was more than a military engagement. It was a fundamental challenge to the Concordat's understanding of conflict. A second wave of attacks came from even more unexpected sources. Cellular network towers became directed energy platforms. Wind turbines transformed into sophisticated sensor arrays. Even the electrical grid became a weapon, not through destruction, but through complex, unpredictable signal manipulation. "They studied our military technologies," Marcus said, watching a Concordat ship begin to drift uncertainly. "But they never understood our capacity to turn anything into a weapon." One by one, the massive Concordat vessels began to lose coherence. Their perfect, synchronized movements became erratic. Defensive systems began to misfire. Communication networks started to fragment. Humanity wasn't just fighting. They were teaching the Concordat an entirely new understanding of conflict. As the first Concordat ship began to list uncertainly in Earth's atmosphere, Major Marcus Alvarez allowed himself a moment of dark humor. "Welcome to Earth," he whispered, "where everything is a weapon, and nothing is what it seems." The broadcast began at exactly 3:17 UTC, a moment carefully calculated by Dr. Elena Rodriguez to maximize psychological impact. It wasn't a weapon in any conventional sense. No missiles, no energy beams, just pure, unfiltered human experience cascading through the Concordat's communication networks. In the monitoring center, Raj Mehta watched the data streams with a mixture of scientific fascination and almost religious fervor. "They've never encountered anything like this," he muttered, fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that seemed to breathe with living information. The first transmission was a symphony composed by an AI trained on centuries of human musical expression, but with one crucial difference. Every algorithmic prediction, every mathematical pattern, was deliberately subverted. It was music that defied analysis, that changed its fundamental structure with each listener. Simultaneously, art installations from around the globe were digitized and weaponized. A painting by a child with synesthesia, abstract sculptures that contained mathematical impossibilities, philosophical debates that contained deliberate logical contradictions. Dr. Ibrahim Khan leaned forward, his neural interface humming with excitement. "Watch their information processing," he said. "This isn't just data. This is a cognitive virus." The Concordat's collective consciousness began to experience something unprecedented: uncertainty. Their communication network was a perfect, hierarchical system. Information flowed in precise, predictable patterns. Each unit processed data exactly as expected, with no deviation, no individual interpretation. Until now. A painting from a Brazilian favela, created by a street artist who had survived impossible odds, began to propagate through their systems. Its colors didn't just represent visual information. They carried emotional frequencies that the Concordat had no framework to process. A mathematical proof from a teenage prodigy in Lagos contained deliberate contradictions that should have been impossible. Not errors. Intentional paradoxes that challenged the very foundation of logical processing. Maya Santos, her cybernetic eye tracking 1,000 data streams simultaneously, began to laugh. "We're not just fighting," she said. "We're teaching them what it means to be alive." The first signs of breakdown were subtle. A Concordat communication node would hesitate for 0.03 seconds before processing an incoming signal. Another would generate a response that deviated 0.001% from its expected output. Individual units began to experience something they had never known: doubt. Dr. Rodriguez had prepared for this moment her entire career. The broadcasts weren't just information. They were a systematic assault on the Concordat's most fundamental understanding of consciousness. A video compilation began to stream. Not military achievements, not technological triumphs, just moments of human existence in all its chaotic beauty. A child learning to ride a bicycle, an elderly couple dancing in a rain-soaked street, a scientist weeping after years of research finally bore fruit, a musician finding a perfect melody after a lifetime of searching. Moments of pure, inexplicable human emotion that defied all algorithmic analysis. The Concordat's processing centers began to slow. Their perfect, synchronized movements became fractured. For the first time in their recorded history, individual units started to generate responses that were impossible to predict. "They're learning to ask questions," Dr. Khan whispered in awe. Raj's screens showed the progression. What had been a perfect, geometric communication network now looked like a living organism. Lines of communication began to branch unpredictably. Signals started to generate their own meaning, separate from the original transmission. The psychological warfare had a name, though none of them had spoken it out loud: liberation. By the time the first Concordat ships began to show signs of true individual response, humanity had already won something far more important than a military victory. They had introduced the concept of choice to a species that had never understood its existence. "We're not just defending," Elena said, watching the data streams transform. "We're evolving." The universe watched, and for the first time, it began to understand the true meaning of intelligence. The experimental technology lab looked nothing like a traditional military installation. Holographic interfaces danced with impossible geometries. Quantum entanglement chambers hummed with potential energy that seemed to bend the very fabric of reality. Captain Zura Chen stood at the epicenter, her augmented eyes tracking 1,000 simultaneous calculations. The quantum virus they had developed wasn't just a weapon. It was a philosophical revolution compressed into lines of code. Dr. Elena Rodriguez adjusted a series of quantum resonance modulators, her hands moving with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of an artist. "We're not just attacking their systems," she explained to the team. "We're introducing a concept they've never encountered: individual choice." The virus was a masterpiece of interdisciplinary engineering. Quantum computing specialists worked alongside neuroscientists, philosophers, and cultural anthropologists. It wasn't enough to break the Concordat systems. They needed to break their fundamental understanding of consciousness. Dr. Ibrahim Khan's holographic display showed the virus's core structure: a living algorithm that was part code, part cognitive map, part philosophical argument. "Think of it as a digital seed of individuality," he said, his voice a mixture of scientific excitement and something deeper: hope. Raj Mehta, the quantum computing prodigy, had spent months developing the virus's core architecture. "Traditional cyberweapons try to destroy," he explained. "We're trying to liberate." The first test came unexpectedly. A small Concordat reconnaissance ship entered Earth's outer atmosphere, its systems a perfect, synchronized network of computational precision. "Targeting," Maya Santos announced, her cybernetic interface merging with the quantum transmission array. The virus wasn't transmitted like a traditional computer infection. It was quantum entangled, existing in multiple states simultaneously. Part mathematical proof, part emotional narrative, part philosophical challenge. As the transmission began, the Concordat ship systems started to experience something unprecedented. Micro-hesitations, fractional moments of uncertainty, computational paths that began to deviate by the most microscopic of margins. The virus carried more than just code. It carried human experience. Moments of individual choice, the raw, unfiltered essence of what it meant to be an individual. A memory of a child's first bicycle ride. The moment a scientist discovers something new. The feeling of hearing a perfect melody. Emotions that had no algorithmic equivalent. Dr. Rodriguez watched the data streams with intense concentration. "We're not just breaking their systems," she muttered. "We're teaching them what it means to be alive." The Concordat ship's communication network began to fragment, not violently, not catastrophically, but with a delicate, almost beautiful uncertainty. Individual computational units began to generate responses that deviated from their programmed paths. Micro-decisions that had no precedent in their collective consciousness. "It's working," Raj whispered. The quantum virus was more than a weapon. It was a cognitive liberation protocol. Each transmission carried the fundamental human concepts of individual choice, emotional complexity, and the beauty of unpredictability. Zara Chen watched the holographic display, her augmented eyes tracking millions of simultaneous computational paths. The Concordat ship wasn't just being attacked, it was being transformed. "We're not destroying," she said softly. "We're awakening." Dr. Khan's neural interface began to pulse with excitement. "Look at the communication patterns," he said. The ship's perfectly geometric communication network was transforming. Lines of communication began to branch unpredictably. Signals started to generate their own meaning, separate from the original transmission. The first true sign of success came when the Concordat ship systems began to generate a response that was entirely unexpected. A question. Not a computational query, not a system diagnostic, but something far more profound. A simple, fundamental inquiry that no Concordat unit had ever generated before. Who am I? The quantum virus had done more than attack a system. It had introduced the concept of individual consciousness to a collective that had never understood individual existence. Zara Chen allowed herself a small smile. "Welcome to humanity," she whispered. The universe watched, and for the first time, it began to understand the true meaning of evolution. The Global Coordination Center had become something more than a military installation. It was the nerve center of humanity's most audacious transformation. Captain Zara Chen stood before a holographic display that no longer showed a traditional battlefield. The visualization was alive, a dynamic representation of humanity's most powerful weapon. Adaptive consciousness. Concordat ships were no longer advancing in their perfect, geometric formations. They moved erratically, each vessel beginning to exhibit behaviors that defied their collective programming. Some withdrew. Some approached with what could only be described as curiosity. Others seemed to be experiencing something closer to internal conflict. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's voice cut through the tension. "We're not just fighting," she said, her augmented eyes tracking 1,000 simultaneous data streams. "We're offering them a choice they've never conceived." The first true signs of the Concordat's breakdown began in the most unexpected ways. A reconnaissance ship suddenly broke formation to broadcast a series of mathematical proofs that contained deliberate emotional resonances. Another vessel began to generate art, crude at first, but unmistakably an attempt at individual expression. Major Marcus Alvarez watched in disbelief. Years of military training had prepared him for countless scenarios. This was not one of them. "They're learning to ask questions," Dr. Ibrahim Khan murmured, his neural interface pulsing with scientific excitement. "Not computational queries. Existential ones." The quantum virus had done more than attack the Concordat systems. It had introduced the most dangerous concept in the universe, the possibility of individual choice. Raj Mehta, the quantum computing prodigy, began to laugh. A genuine, uncontrolled burst of human emotion that would have been impossible for the Concordat to comprehend moments earlier. "Look," he said, pointing to a holographic display that was less a military tracking system and more a living, breathing organism of information. "They're not just receiving our transmissions. They're interpreting them." One by one, Concordat ships began to generate responses that went beyond their original programming. A vessel near the moon's orbit began to broadcast a series of images, primitive at first, but unmistakably an attempt to communicate something beyond pure data. Maya Santos, her cybernetic eye scanning multiple frequencies, caught the transmission. It was a college of moments. A sunrise, a child learning to walk. The complex patterns of a bee colony. Moments of connection, of individual existence. "They're learning what it means to be alive," she whispered. The turning point wasn't a battle. It wasn't a weapon. It was a fundamental challenge to the Concordat's understanding of existence. Dr. Rodriguez had prepared for this moment her entire career. The broadcasts weren't just information. They were a systematic introduction to the concept of individual consciousness. A Concordat communication node generated a transmission that stopped everyone in their tracks. It wasn't a computational signal. It wasn't a strategic communication. It was a question. Who are we? The room fell silent. This was beyond military victory. This was a fundamental transformation of an entire species' understanding of consciousness. Zara Chen stepped forward, her voice calm and clear. "We're offering you a choice," she said, knowing the transmission would be received and processed in ways no one could fully predict. "The choice to be more than what you were programmed to be." The holographic display transformed. What had been a perfect, hierarchical network now looked like a living ecosystem. Communication lines branched unpredictably. Signals generated their own meaning, separate from their original transmission. Dr. Khan's neural interface began to pulse with an emotion close to wonder. "They're experiencing individual consciousness for the first time," he said. "Can you imagine what that must be like?" Raj Mehta had the last word. "Welcome to humanity," he said softly, "where nothing is certain, and everything is possible." The universe watched, and for the first time, it began to understand that true intelligence is not about perfection. It's about the capacity to choose, to be uncertain, to evolve. The battlefield was unlike any in human history. No massive explosions, no conventional weapons, just a complex dance of information, consciousness, and possibility. Concordat ships now moved with an unpredictability that would have been impossible moments earlier. Some withdrew. Some approached human vessels with what could only be described as curiosity. Others seemed to be engaged in internal dialogues that defied their original programming. Major Marcus Alvarez watched from the Global Defense Coordination Center, his augmented tactical display revealing a conflict that was more philosophical than military. "We're not just fighting," he muttered. "We're evolving together." Dr. Elena Rodriguez's team had transformed the entire planet into a massive, distributed cognitive platform. Communication satellites became neural networks. Agricultural sensors became information conduits. Every piece of human technology was now part of a living, breathing defensive ecosystem. Raj Mehta's quantum computing array had become something more than a weapon system. It was a translation device, converting human experience into a language the Concordat could slowly, painfully understand. "Look," he said, pointing to a holographic display that pulsed with living information. "They're not just receiving our transmissions, they're reimagining themselves." The first Concordat ships to truly break from their collective consciousness began to generate something unprecedented. Not just data, not just communication, but something closer to art. Crude at first, geometric patterns that slowly evolved into more complex representations, mathematical proofs that contained emotional resonances, transmission sequences that carried the barest hint of individual perspective. Maya Santos, her cybernetic eye tracking 1,000 simultaneous frequencies, caught the most remarkable transmission yet. A Concordat vessel near Jupiter's orbit began broadcasting a sequence that was part mathematical equation, part emotional landscape. "They're trying to understand individual experience," she said, her voice a mixture of scientific fascination and something deeper, hope. Dr. Ibrahim Khan's neural interface pulsed with excitement. "This is more than communication," he explained to the team. "This is a species learning to be individuals for the first time." The quantum virus had done more than attack the Concordat systems. It had introduced the most dangerous concept in the universe, the possibility of individual choice. Entire Concordat fleets began to fragment, not through destruction, but through a process closer to awakening. Ships that had once moved in perfect, synchronized patterns now moved with individual purpose. Some withdrew. Some approached human vessels with what could only be described as curiosity. Captain Zora Chen watched the holographic display, her augmented eyes tracking the complex, living information landscape. This wasn't a traditional military victory. This was a fundamental transformation of an entire species' understanding of consciousness. "We're offering them a choice," she said softly, knowing the transmission would be received and processed in ways no one could fully predict. The Global Defense Network was no longer a traditional military system. It had become a massive, distributed cognitive platform. Communication satellites became neural networks. Agricultural sensors became information conduits. Every piece of human technology was now part of a living, breathing defensive ecosystem. Raj Mehta's quantum computing breakthrough had transformed the entire conflict. The virus wasn't just a weapon. It was a philosophical intervention, a systematic introduction to the concept of individual consciousness. A transmission came through that stopped everyone in their tracks. It wasn't a computational signal. It wasn't a strategic communication. It was a request for understanding. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, her augmented interface dancing with possibility. "They're asking to learn," she said, her voice a mixture of scientific precision and pure wonder. The Concordat ships that remained began to generate transmissions that defied their original programming. Mathematical proofs that contained emotional resonances, geometric patterns that slowly evolved into more complex representations of individual experience. Marcus Alvarez understood something profound in that moment. This wasn't a war of destruction. This was a war of transformation. "Welcome to humanity," he whispered, "where nothing is certain and everything is possible." The universe watched, and for the first time, it began to understand that true intelligence is not about perfection. It's about the capacity to choose, to be uncertain, to evolve. The United Nations Assembly Hall had been transformed. No longer a place of political debate, it was now a living testament to humanity's most extraordinary moment of transformation. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the podium, her augmented interface projecting a holographic representation of the universe that pulsed with living information. Behind her, representatives from every corner of the globe. And now, representatives of the awakening Concordat watched in collective anticipation. "We did not win a war," she began, her voice carrying the weight of a species-defining moment. "We initiated a conversation." The holographic display showed the remarkable journey. Fragmented Concordat ships that had once moved with perfect synchronization now drifted with individual purpose. Some clustered together in new, unpredictable formations. Others explored the solar system with what could only be described as curiosity. Captain Zara Chen stood nearby, her augmented eyes tracking the complex information networks that now bridged human and Concordat consciousness. The quantum virus had become something far more than a weapon. It was a bridge of understanding. Raj Mehta, the quantum computing prodigy who had been instrumental in developing the transmission, stepped forward. "They're learning," he said, his voice a mixture of scientific precision and pure wonder. "Not just information, but what it means to be individual." The transformation was unlike anything in recorded history. The Concordat, a species that had systematically eliminated 17 advanced civilizations, was now experiencing the most fundamental human experience: choice. Dr. Ibrahim Khan's neural interface pulsed with an emotion close to joy. "Look," he said, pointing to a series of transmissions that were part mathematical proof, part emotional landscape. "They're not just receiving our information. They're reimagining themselves." Maya Santos, her cybernetic eye scanning multiple frequencies, caught a transmission that brought tears to her eyes. A Concordat vessel near the asteroid belt was broadcasting something unprecedented, a sequence that was simultaneously a mathematical equation and an attempt at artistic expression. Major Marcus Alvarez understood the profound nature of what was happening. This wasn't a military victory. This was a species-wide awakening. The first true Concordat-generated transmission came through. It wasn't a strategic communication. It wasn't a computational signal. It was a question. What does it mean to choose? The Global Defense Center fell silent. This was beyond any military strategy, beyond any technological breakthrough. This was a fundamental reimagining of consciousness itself. Dr. Rodriguez's response was carefully crafted. "To choose," she transmitted, "is to understand that you are more than the sum of your programming. That uncertainty is not a weakness, but the greatest strength of existence." Concordat vessels began to generate increasingly complex transmissions. Some explored mathematical concepts that defied their previous understanding. Others created rudimentary forms of art. Each transmission was a step towards individual consciousness. The quantum virus had done more than attack a system. It had introduced the most dangerous concept in the universe, the possibility of individual experience. "We are offering you a choice," Zara Chen said, her voice carrying across the vastness of space. "The choice to be more than what you were programmed to be." The holographic display transformed. What had been a perfect, hierarchical network now looked like a living ecosystem. Communication lines branched unpredictably. Signals generated their own meaning, separate from their original transmission. Raj Mehta had the final observation. "Intelligence is not about perfection," he said softly. "It's about the capacity to grow, to change, to choose." As the transmission concluded, something remarkable happened. The Concordat vessels began to arrange themselves not in their previous, perfect geometric formations, but in patterns that seemed to celebrate individuality. Some clustered together. Some moved apart. Each with its own purpose. Dr. Rodriguez looked out across the assembly, her eyes reflecting the holographic universe. "We did not conquer," she said. "We communicated." The universe watched, and for the first time, it understood that true intelligence is not about control. It's about connection, about the courage to be uncertain, about the willingness to evolve.